It was my 28th birthday. My coworkers gathered around my desk with a wrapped gift box. I opened it in front of everyone. Inside was a head of iceberg lettuce with a card that said, "Happy birthday. Thought you could use this more than cake." They laughed. I smiled, said thank you, and put it in my desk drawer. 5 years later, I fired every single person who was in that circle, and I didn't lose a second of sleep over it. I'm Rebecca Shaw, and this is the story of how a head of lettuce became the most expensive joke anyone ever made. If you've ever been humiliated at work, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. 2018. I was 28 years old, working as a financial analyst at Meridian Capital, a mid-sized investment firm in Manhattan. I was good at my job, really good. I could analyze market trends, build financial models, and spot investment opportunities that other analysts missed. I was also 340 pounds. Obese. The biggest person in an office full of people who spent their lunch breaks talking about their CrossFit workouts and their macro counts and their latest cleanse. I'd been there 2 years. I kept my head down, did excellent work, and tried to ignore the comments. The helpful suggestions about diets. The concerned questions about my health. The jokes that were always followed by, "just kidding," or "don't be so sensitive." My department had this tradition. Every birthday, the team would chip in and get a gift. Usually something nice. A bottle of wine. A gift card to a nice restaurant. Tickets to a show. My birthday fell on a Tuesday. I didn't expect anything big. Maybe a card. Maybe some cupcakes. That's how these things usually went. Around 2 p.m., my coworker Jake announced it was birthday time. 7 people from my team gathered around my desk. They were smiling. One of them was filming on their phone. Jake handed me a gift box wrapped in birthday paper with a big bow on top. I should have known something was wrong. The box was cold, and it was the wrong weight for anything normal. But I smiled and started unwrapping it anyway. I pulled off the wrapping paper, opened the box. Inside, sitting on a bed of tissue paper, was a head of iceberg lettuce. Bright green, fresh from the grocery store. And attached to it was a birthday card. I opened the card. It said, "Happy birthday, Rebecca. Thought you could use this more than cake. Here's to a healthier you. Love, your work family." The laughter started immediately. Not quiet chuckles. Loud, genuine laughter. Jake was doubled over. Sarah was wiping tears from her eyes. The person filming was zooming in on my face. Someone said, "Oh my God, her expression is priceless." I sat there holding a head of lettuce in front of 7 colleagues who thought humiliating me was hilarious. In an office full of people who'd stopped what they were doing to watch. I had a choice in that moment. I could cry. I could yell. I could throw the lettuce at them and storm out. Everyone was waiting to see what I'd do. Instead, I smiled. I said, "Wow, you guys are so creative. Thank you." I put the lettuce carefully back in the box, placed it in my desk drawer, and went back to work. The laughter died down. They seemed almost disappointed that I hadn't reacted more. They drifted back to their desks, making jokes about my good attitude and being able to take a joke. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I pulled out my phone under my desk and took a picture of that lettuce. Then I set it as the lock screen on my work computer. Every single time I logged in, I'd see it. That head of lettuce, that card, that reminder of exactly what my colleagues thought of me. I made myself a promise that day. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to become so successful, so powerful, so absolutely essential that those 7 people would regret ever thinking I was someone they could mock. After the lettuce incident, something in me changed. I'd always worked hard. Now I became obsessed. I started coming in at 6 a.m., staying until 8 p.m. I took work home. I spent weekends building models and researching markets. I made myself an expert on sectors nobody else wanted to touch. 3 months after my birthday, I identified an investment opportunity in renewable energy infrastructure that everyone else had dismissed as too risky. I built a comprehensive analysis showing why it would pay off. I presented it to the senior partners. They approved a $50 million investment. Within 18 months, it had returned 300%. I'd just made the firm $150 million in profit. I got promoted to senior analyst, got a significant raise, got my own office. The partners started requesting me specifically for high-stakes projects. Jake and his friends, they were still doing the same mid-level work they'd been doing for years, making the same salary, sitting in the same cubicles. But they were still making comments, still making jokes. Jake asked loudly if my new office had reinforced floors. Sarah suggested I celebrate my promotion with a salad. The jokes never stopped. I smiled every time, said nothing, and added their names to a mental list I was keeping. Year 3 at Meridian, I was promoted to associate director, youngest person at that level in the firm's history. I was managing a team of 5 analysts, leading major client accounts. My investment recommendations were being implemented at the highest level. I'd also started building relationships outside my department, with senior partners, with the CEO, with the board members. I attended every company event, every networking function, every opportunity to be visible to the people who made decisions. I learned something important during this time. The people at the top didn't care what I looked like. They cared about one thing: results. And I delivered results better than anyone. Year 4, the firm underwent a major restructuring. They were consolidating departments, eliminating redundancies, creating new leadership positions. It was an opportunity, a massive one. I'd been preparing for something like this. I'd made myself invaluable. My track record was flawless. My client relationships were strong. My analysis had made the firm hundreds of millions. I put together a proposal for a new investment strategy division, presented it directly to the CEO, showed him how it could diversify our portfolio, reduce risk, and increase returns. Backed it up with 5 years of data and projections. He loved it, created the division, made me vice president and head of the new department. At 32 years old, I was one of the youngest VPs in the company. I had a corner office on the 42nd floor, a team of 20 people, direct reports to the CEO. I was making 7 figures. And I still had that picture of the lettuce, still looked at it every morning, still remembered. As VP, I had influence I'd never had before. I sat in on senior leadership meetings. I had input on company strategy. I had access to performance reviews and personnel decisions. And I started paying attention to my old department, the team I'd come from, where Jake, Sarah, and the others still worked. Their performance was mediocre at best. They did the minimum required. They hadn't brought in any significant new business in years. They coasted on accounts that had been established before they even joined. But they'd been there long enough that they felt secure, protected by tenure and relationships with their direct manager, who happened to be someone who valued loyalty over performance. Then that manager retired. The CEO asked me to recommend someone to take over that department. I suggested bringing in someone from outside, someone who valued results over relationships, someone who wouldn't tolerate mediocrity. We hired Marcus Thompson, former Marine, brilliant analyst, zero patience for excuses. He took over the department with a mandate to improve performance or make changes. I didn't tell Marcus about the lettuce. I didn't tell him to target anyone specifically. I just told him to evaluate everyone fairly and hold them to the same standards I held my team to. Within 3 months, Marcus had identified the underperformers, Jake, Sarah, 3 others who'd been part of that birthday circle. Their numbers were terrible. Their client relationships were weak. They were dead weight. Marcus came to me with his assessment, asked what he should do. I told him the truth. The firm needed top performers. If these people couldn't deliver, they needed to go. But firing them immediately would be too obvious, too easy. So we did something else. Marcus put all 5 of them on performance improvement plans, completely by the book, legal, documented, fair. They had 90 days to hit specific targets, bring in new business, improve their analysis quality, demonstrate value. The targets were challenging but achievable for someone who actually worked hard. I watched from my office on the 42nd floor as they struggled. Jake tried to coast on charm. Sarah made excuses about the market conditions. The others blamed everyone but themselves. None of them hit their targets. Not even close. At the end of 90 days, Marcus brought me the results, asked for authorization to terminate. I reviewed every file, every metric, every piece of documentation. Everything was in order. Their failure was undeniable. I approved the terminations, all 5 of them, same day. But I wanted to be there when it happened. I wanted to see their faces. So I arranged to be in a meeting in that department that afternoon. They were called into the conference room one by one. HR was there. Marcus was there. And I was there, sitting at the end of the table with my laptop, supposedly working on something else. Jake came in first. He sat down, confident, like this was just another meeting. Marcus laid out the documentation, the missed targets, the failed improvement plan, the decision to terminate effective immediately. Jake's face changed. He looked at Marcus, then at HR. Then he saw me at the end of the table. Really saw me for the first time. He said there must be some mistake, that his numbers weren't that bad, that he'd been with the company for 8 years, that this wasn't fair. Marcus asked if he disputed any of the documented metrics. Jake couldn't, because they were facts. HR explained the severance package, 2 weeks, standard for his level. Jake stood up, still in shock, and left the room. Sarah was next. Same script, same documentation, same result. But Sarah did something different. She looked right at me and said, "This is because of you, isn't it?" I looked up from my laptop, made eye contact, said absolutely nothing. Just looked at her until she left. The other 3 went the same way. Shock, denial, anger, acceptance. By 4 p.m., all 5 of them were packing their desks. I walked through the department on my way back to my office, watched them putting their personal items in boxes. Their faces were red. Some were crying. Some were angry. Jake saw me, called out, "This is really professional, Rebecca, real classy." I stopped, turned to face him, and I smiled. The same smile I'd given him 5 years earlier when I opened that lettuce. Then I walked away, without saying a word. 6 months later, the CEO announced his retirement. The board began searching for his replacement. They were considering external candidates, but several board members suggested they look internal first. My name came up. I was young, but I'd proven myself repeatedly. My division was the most profitable in the company. My strategic vision had transformed how we approached investments. I had the respect of clients and colleagues. The board interviewed me 3 times, grilled me on my vision for the company, my leadership philosophy, my plans for growth. I'd been preparing for this moment my entire career. I was ready. They offered me the position, CEO of Meridian Capital. At 34 years old, I accepted. My first week, I implemented new company-wide policies, professional conduct standards, zero tolerance for harassment or bullying, mandatory respect and inclusion training for everyone. I also did something else. I had that lettuce photo printed, framed, and I hung it in my office, right behind my desk where everyone who came in would see it. People asked about it. I'd tell them it was a reminder of what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness, when they confuse professionalism with permission to be cruel. Word got around about why I'd framed a picture of lettuce. The story spread through the company, about the birthday gift, about what had happened to the people who thought humiliating a colleague was funny. It became a legend, a warning, the lettuce incident, the CEO's origin story. Some people thought I was vindictive, that I'd held a grudge for 5 years and used my power to get revenge. Maybe they were right, but I preferred to think of it differently. Those 5 people had created a toxic environment. They'd made someone feel worthless on what should have been a happy occasion. They'd filmed it for entertainment. They'd never apologized. They'd continued the behavior for years. And when they'd finally been held accountable for their performance, for their actual contribution to the company, they'd failed. Not because I set them up, but because they'd spent years coasting instead of growing. I didn't fire them because they gave me lettuce. I fired them because they were mediocre employees who happened to also be bullies. The lettuce just made it more satisfying. A year after I became CEO, I got an email from Jake. The subject line said, "I need to say this." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. I opened it. It was long. He talked about how losing his job had been devastating, how he'd struggled to find another position, how he'd had to move back in with his parents at 35, how he'd been forced to confront some hard truths about himself. He said he'd been in therapy, that his therapist had helped him see that he'd been insecure his whole life, that he'd made fun of others to feel better about himself, that what he'd done to me was cruel and inexcusable. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He didn't expect a response. He just needed me to know that he was sorry, genuinely sorry, that he'd learned from it, that he'd become a better person. I read that email 3 times, thought about it for a week. Then I did something I didn't expect to do. I responded. I told him I appreciated the apology, that I believed people could change, that I hoped he had, but I also told him something else. I told him that sorry didn't undo the damage. Sorry didn't erase the humiliation. Sorry didn't give back the days I'd cried or the nights I'd questioned my worth. Sorry was a starting point, not an end point. I told him I accepted his apology. But I also told him that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences last longer than we'd like them to. He wrote back, said he understood, said he deserved everything that happened, said he'd learned that being cruel has a cost. I never responded to that one. I'd said what I needed to say. As CEO, I transformed Meridian's culture. I implemented policies that protected people from the kind of treatment I'd experienced. I made it clear that performance mattered, but so did how you treated people. I also did something else. I started mentoring young professionals who didn't fit the typical mold, people who were overweight or shy, or from non-traditional backgrounds, people who were brilliant but overlooked because they didn't look the part. I gave them opportunities. I advocated for them. I showed them that what other people thought about their appearance didn't define their potential. Some people said I was too focused on this issue, that I should just move on, that I was letting one incident define me. But they were wrong. That incident didn't define me. It clarified me. It showed me exactly who I was and who I wanted to become. I wasn't successful because of the lettuce incident. I was successful despite it. But that incident taught me something valuable about resilience, about turning pain into purpose, about never forgetting where you came from. Here's what I learned from a head of lettuce and 5 years of strategic patience. When people humiliate you, they're telling you something important. Not about you. About them. They're showing you their insecurities, their cruelty, their character. You can respond with immediate anger. You can quit. You can cry. Or you can do something more powerful. You can remember. You can use that pain as fuel. You can become so successful that their judgment becomes irrelevant. I didn't spend 5 years plotting revenge. I spent 5 years becoming excellent. The consequences for those people were just a side effect of my success. Because here's the truth. Mediocre people who are also cruel don't last in environments that value actual performance. They survive in places where politics matter more than results, where charm matters more than competence. Once I had the power to create a meritocracy, their time was up. Not because I targeted them, but because they couldn't compete when the rules were fair. The lettuce was humiliating, but it was also clarifying. It showed me exactly what I was up against. And it showed me what I needed to become. I needed to become so undeniably competent that my appearance became irrelevant, so strategically positioned that I controlled the game, so successful that their opinions didn't matter. And I did. I run a $3 billion investment firm. I manage 400 employees. I make decisions that affect millions of dollars and hundreds of lives. I've been featured in Fortune and Forbes and Bloomberg. I speak at conferences about leadership and transformation. Jake works at a small regional firm now, makes a fraction of what he used to make. From what I hear, he's actually become a decent person. Therapy helped. Consequences helped more. Sarah left finance entirely. She's a real estate agent in New Jersey. Seems happy. Posted something on LinkedIn a while ago about kindness and professional growth. Didn't mention me. Didn't need to. The other 3 scattered to various positions. None remarkable. None terrible. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives with the memory of the time they humiliated someone who became extraordinary. And me, I still have that photo in my office. I still look at it sometimes when I'm making difficult decisions. It reminds me why I do what I do. Not for revenge, for justice, for the idea that competence should matter more than appearance. That cruelty should have consequences. That being underestimated is an advantage if you're smart enough to use it. If you're watching this and you've ever been humiliated at work, bullied by colleagues, made to feel less than because of how you look, here's what I want you to know. Don't quit. Don't let them win by making you leave. Don't give them the satisfaction of breaking you. Instead, use it. Use that anger. Use that pain. Use that humiliation as fuel to become so exceptional they can't ignore you. Work harder than everyone. Be smarter than everyone. Build skills they don't have. Create value they can't match. Become so undeniably excellent that their opinions become irrelevant. And then, when you have the power to change things, do it. Not with petty revenge, not with vindictive cruelty, but with fair standards, with meritocracy, with consequences for people who mistake kindness for weakness. The people who humiliated me didn't fail because I destroyed them. They failed because when they finally faced fair evaluation, they couldn't measure up. They'd spent years being mediocre bullies instead of becoming competent professionals. That's the real revenge. Not destroying them, becoming so successful that they destroy themselves by comparison. I'm Rebecca Shaw. I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. I've transformed how my company approaches both business and culture. I've mentored dozens of professionals who were told they didn't fit the mold. I'm also 340 pounds. Still, I didn't lose weight to earn respect. I didn't change my body to deserve dignity. I proved that excellence has nothing to do with appearance. My coworkers gave me lettuce on my birthday as a joke. They thought they were reminding me of my place. They were actually showing me exactly how high I needed to climb. When I became CEO, they stopped laughing. Not because I made them, but because there's nothing funny about watching someone you underestimated become your worst professional nightmare. That head of lettuce cost them their careers, not because I was vindictive, but because their cruelty revealed their character, and their character revealed their incompetence. If this story resonated with you, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments what moment made you decide to stop being nice and start being unstoppable. I want to hear your story. And remember, they'll give you lettuce, you'll give them consequences, and the world will call it justice. Thanks for watching. Now go become someone's biggest regret.